I am so ready to rant about Jim Butcher and the Furies of Calderon. So on one hand, I did think I would enjoy this book based on the premise. The idea sounded really interesting to me and I was excited to try it. On the other hand, I did go in with a little bit of prejudice, and I didn't want to go in feeling prejudiced against him already. And so I felt like in order to overcome that prejudice, I pushed through and read for farther than I otherwise would have. And so I made it about halfway. So full transparency, I did DNF this book at about the halfway mark. Farther than I wanted to read, but I wanted to give it the benefit of the doubt. So the premise that I thought was so interesting was that, from what I understand, I could get details wrong, Jim Butcher had been having an online discussion in some book forum with another author, and the idea of that conversation was that ideas are cheap. The idea of a story is not what matters so much as the execution and how well it is done. So the challenge was, could Jim Butcher write a good story combining the ideas of Pokemon and the Roman Legion? Well, in my opinion, no. It's not a horribly written book. I can see his talents as an author. He's not for me, though. As far as those two meshing ideas, I felt like it was very, very light on the Pokemon inspiration. I had hoped for cute creatures or even like fierce creatures, and the Furies don't really make their presence known as characters. They're very much in the background. You don't really see them. The story is really about the humans. Oh, also, I probably should have said this at the beginning. Because I DNF'd and because I'm ranting, this will not be spoiler free, at least for the first half of the first book. And then the idea of the Roman Legion inspiration was a little more present, a little stronger than the Pokemon inspiration, but the main bulk of the story takes place out in a village kind of away from civilization, and so you don't really see much of the Roman Legion in this first one. I assume it comes in more in the further books. This is a multi-book series. But just from the premise that I had heard, my expectations were one thing, and then those expectations were not met. As for my prejudice going in, those expectations were met. And that was that I had heard that the Dresden Files had an unpleasant amount of sexism. So because it was present in one of this author's series, I expected it to be present in this series. Now, I have seen people online say that it's not Jim Butcher that is sexist, it is the character, Harry Dresden, and that all of the sexism is just this character and that this character gets better about it over the course of the series. I feel like that's an excuse. I feel like that's just people who enjoy the series providing an excuse for the author on why they are allowed to continue to like the series and to like the character. I had a feeling that if a main character is written that way, that's probably going to be viewpoints that come through in other works by the same author. So my expectation was to encounter some sexism in this series. And at the very beginning, the female character that it starts with is introduced as a character. She is not overly sexualized or objectified. And so I was like, okay, maybe I have this author wrong, I'll keep going. And then every other female character that was introduced very much felt like their only presence was for men to be attracted to, or for other female characters to compare themselves to. The one character who's described as not being very attractive and being in her upper 30s is comparing herself to these other attractive younger women. And the women are constantly thinking about how they look to the men in the series or to the other women. And so many of the male characters, when they would view a female character, was just through the lens of, would I do her? And it was starting to get really, really annoying. Every female character had to be described in such a way that we knew whether they were considered attractive or not, how certain parts of their bodies appeared, how big certain parts of their bodies were, and it seemed really important to the author that we know how much to sexualize each female character. And I'm going to take a moment to compare that to what I get when I read The Wheel of Time. Robert Jordan is pretty famously known for how he describes female characters. And I also feel like when Jordan is describing a woman, it is important to him that the readers know whether that woman is attractive, how much of certain parts of her are showing. But I will say that when I read a Wheel of Time book, I get the sense that Robert Jordan thinks women are nice to look at. I feel like he appreciates the female form, and that comes through in his work. And as a female reader, yes, that gets annoying. A woman in real life or a fictional female character should be far more than what they look like or how attractive they are. The feeling I get from this author in just the first half of one book was not that he appreciates the female form or that women are attractive, but that women are really there for men to have power over. And that, to me, is a very large difference. And then, as I was getting a little farther in, I DNF'd this over a week ago, so some of the names are getting fuzzy for me. I planned on naming names as I ranted. A couple of the female characters get captured. The aunt and the very attractive other water fury crafter, whatever. They get captured, and it is very heavily suggested that bad things are going to happen to them. They are going to be treated in the worst and most horrible way possible. And as I was getting closer to that happening, I was just thinking, please don't. Please don't. And then I was thinking, it seems like it's going to happen. Please don't show it. Please don't describe it. And if you have read this book, and you are familiar with the scene in the smokehouse, you'll know what I'm referring to. And so not just the fact that it had to happen, because it doesn't have to happen. As a writer, this is your own fantasy world and you can decide what happens. So the fact that this author decided that that had to happen, and that it has to happen on screen, and that the other female character has to watch, and that it has to get as bad as it can possibly get, was so unnecessary and made me so upset and so angry that I was like, I don't need to overcome my prejudice anymore. It's as bad or worse than I thought it was going to be. And then I felt so justified in DNFing. If I hadn't gotten that far and had put it down because I thought something like that might happen, I might not have as defensible of a position as I now have. Because I got there and read it, now I can feel free to be upset at this author and the storytelling that he chose. And I know there are people who love this series, and there's people who will maybe disagree with me, or it's just fiction, so what's the harm, or whatever. But I felt as a woman that I could not in good conscience continue to read a story where the women were portrayed and treated that way. I felt like there was more stuff I was mad at. I actually liked the main guy, Tavi. I thought he was a pretty good character. I thought his uncle was pretty well done. There was a battle scene where the uncle is fighting the other steadholder that he's having trouble with, and that battle was really cool. I could see that one of Butcher's strengths is those, like, here's how cool of a thing this character can do, and showing that. It was weird to read hundreds of pages, over 300 pages, and it had only been a couple of days in the book. It felt like constant action. This doesn't slow down. Stuff is just happening and happening and happening, but it's only happening over a couple of days. The pacing was weird. I don't know if I'll say whether the pacing was good or bad. It was just different. I'd probably say the pacing was well done, but I also didn't continue into the second half to see if there was any kind of slump or to see whether it just kept crescendoing and crescendoing clear to the end. But for me, having heard what I have heard about the Dresden Files, and then having read what I have read in this series, I have zero interest in ever trying another Jim Butcher book. There are so many other books out there by so many other authors who can write a well-done woman, or just who I can respect how they write women, that by putting this down and saying I'm never going to read another book by him, I don't feel like I'm missing out on anything. I don't feel like there's some wonderful magical story that I am denying myself. There were people that made me feel, not made me feel bad, but like tried to make me feel bad for not continuing along in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. I can get that. I can get that that is a large-scale sweeping epic with a lot of fans who really love it. For this series, I just don't know why. I have a feeling it's not women who love it. So thanks for joining my rant, patrons. I appreciate you guys a lot. I will link my Patreon and my Instagram. And normally, since I have joined the Amazon Associates program, I would link books in the description in case you want to read them, but I'm not linking these. You know what? I will actually link a different book that I'm reading right now that's also inspired by the Roman Legion that I am enjoying more than I enjoyed this one. Thanks for joining and happy reading. Bye.